Okay. Okay. All right.
Sir, please, can you make this thing bold? Can you make it bold?
All right. Is it better now?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So I think we'll come back to all of this. So I want to create a new file. Okay. So I realized that most of us weren't familiar with a lot of syntax from Node.js. Okay. We are not familiar with a lot of syntax from Node.js. So I'll be dedicating a good portion of today's class to introduce you all to those syntax that I believe that you need to be aware of. Okay. So of course, most of the things that I'll be covering here will be things that you already know, you understand from the previous um, JavaScript or TypeScript classes and classes or sessions. So I'll just try to be brief as I go through each and every one of them again. Okay. So in Node.js, there's something called modules. Okay, and these modules are a way we use to split our code into multiple um, files. Okay, and these modules have something that is called a scope. Okay, and any variable that we define in these modules will be limited to those modules, except you explicitly inform that module that you want those variables or identifiers to be exported. Okay, so and we will be looking at a few syntax of how to export certain variables. Okay, so I'll create a new file, export, let's call this
So,
variables,
sorry,
the
sir. I think
jet.
oh, I think you
You can't
stopped
hear
sharing.
me.
You stopped sharing your screen.
Stop
We
sharing
can't
your
see your
screen
screen.
or
Your screen.
network.
That's sure. Because
Yes, yes, network. Okay, okay. So can you see my screen now? Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, should be able to, all right, should be able to see it now. So here we will export an individual item. Okay, and this is actually a JavaScript file. So we are using the common JS way of exporting and importing variables. Okay, so probably I will also show you the Node.js ways. I said Node.js, the TypeScript ways of importing and exporting as well. So first of all, we have this export object. Okay, And with this export object, it's a global variable that um, we use to export variables. But in this case now, I want to export this function. Okay, this function, and this is an anonymous function. Return hello. So I go to my main.js and I import.
So your screen is black. I don't know if it's just me.
Network. Sorry, I don't know why my network is breaking. If I get into these things. So guys, see my screen now. Yeah. Maybe it's simple. Okay. So I'm going to import this. Um, so I'm supposed to consider that log this thing. I need to just consider that log the output. Okay. So this is how to import and export variables. So with this export
Sir,
object, this export
please, I can't
is
see your
basically
screen.
it has gone up again. It's here. Okay. It's going to see it now, right? Okay, let's proceed. So this export variable that you can see here now is actually like a JSON object. Okay. In such a way that when we imported this variables module, when we imported this variables module this way, this is like that export, this is the export object, okay? Then having access to that object, we now dereference it and then call this my function that we defined here, okay? To give you a better view, I'll define another variable called a, and to import it here to, for this time, I'm going to console.log the entire variables object, okay? Okay, so if you can see this object here. This is the entire export object. I'm just trying to show you what the visual representation looks like. You understand? So this is the export object, and then this is the my function. You understand? And this is the a variable that we added to the my to this export object. So you see, another shorthand too to add another shorthand to add variables to the export object is to basically assign it this way. Okay, so you can basically just assign a JSON object. So let's say we comment this, all of this out, and then define new variables b equal to 1, c equal to 3, and then running this. Let me get mistake. Okay, okay. The main address, I didn't comment this out because I cannot run it. Okay, so this is also another way to import variables, to export variables. So you can see the export, the JSON object, just the way I signed it to module.export. Okay, so that is that for importing and exporting variables in, okay, I should be able to write a TypeScript. So let me, yes. So this is the TypeScript file now. So let's say, okay, 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 so I'm trying to show you how you import and export files using TypeScript. Let's just initialize this thing. Okay. And now we're going to this is something I don't want to configure a TypeScript project here now. Please move on, please. So we already know how to declare variables already using the const um, keyword or let keyword. Okay. So you should know that you can't declare a variable that you define using const, but you can safely declare you can safely assign variables you that you define using here. So to test this out, you see that this is through an error. Okay, if you throw an error, you say A is equal to A and B is equal to B. Okay, you're expecting that this will throw an error. Yes, assignment to constant variable. So Node.js is going to throw an error when you try to reassign a constant variable. So this is actually a good way to make sure that variables that you don't plan to change, you don't accidentally change their values during runtime. Understand? So commenting this out, we say that A will still be 2 and B will now be 4. A is 2 and B is 4. Okay.
Sorry, your screen
Then
has gone off. I'm sorry, your screen has gone off.
all right, I can see that. Okay. You should be able to see my screen now. So the next concept is functions declaration. So there are several ways to define functions in Node.js. Okay. The first is the regular way, the way we all know how to do it. By using the function keyword. Okay. Using the function keyword, then you have your function name, then you now have the open braces. Then maybe if you want to accept parameters, you write the first one, and the second one, then you write a comma, then the second argument, close your bracket, open the curly braces, and you close it. And inside these braces, you will have your function body, everything that you want this function to do whenever you call it. Okay, so now we just define the function called add, and we want this function to add two numbers, and it's going to output the result. So result of A plus B is equal to A plus B plus A. Now we'll call this with 1 and 3. Executing this with okay. So result of 1 plus 3 is equal to 4. Okay, now that's it. Excuse me. And the other way is using arrow functions. Let me label this. Traditional method, array function. So with this arrow function, you just define a variable, just like as if you want to assign a number or any other data type to it. You understand? But it should just be a, a comment this. The normal function, as if you want to assign 3 or any other value to it, you understand? But you just write the open bracket, then your argument, close bracket, then this equal to sign followed by an arrow. Understand? Followed by an arrow, or rather a greater sign, a greater than sign. Then you open the curly braces and you close it. Okay. And then inside here we now have the same thing that we had here. Okay. So now when I call this add, just the same way I call the traditional, the way I defined it in the traditional way. So when I call it, it's supposed to run without any difference, without any noticeable difference. Okay. And then when declaring your functions, you can also have something called default parameters in such a way that if the user doesn't supply any argument, okay, if they don't supply any arguments, like here now, they don't supply any arguments, but you actually expected them to supply instance, or you don't want to make it required, you can just pass default argument. Then running the script will give us result of 0 plus 0 is equal to 0 because I did not pass any arguments when calling this add function. Okay, so you just made use of this to here. Okay, so an arrow function could actually so instead of using these curly braces, you understand, the way I wrote this block here, you could just write it in a single line. So you would say A minus B. Okay. So this right here now is an expression. Understand? So whenever you want to define your function this way, this is just as if you are writing let's say if you add the curly braces, okay, open curly braces, close curly braces, and then you write its return. So it's just the same thing, okay, as writing it this way, A minus B. Okay, they are just the same thing. Using this return, or when you write return, anything that is following return should be like an expression that when evaluated would be like a value. Understand? So that is the same thing that happens there. So we now have anonymous functions. Let me call this out. So with these anonymous functions, you don't have to you will still make use of the function keyword just this way, but you will not be passing a function name. Understand? You will not be passing a function name. Let me give an example. Say that same subtract function. Define a variable, then function, open bracket, then our parameters, then we now have our curly braces. Okay. And here now we now want it to subtract the result of A minus B is equal to A minus B. That's equal something. Okay. Subtract 5, 1. Okay. So running this is result of 5 minus 1 is equal to 4. So that we actually successfully define this subtract function using an anonymous function. So one of these, you'll be wondering that why will you although it just gives a lot of flexibility, you understand? So most of the times, most developers will usually make use of the arrow function because it looks cleaner to write. Okay, would now let's explore callback functions. the one that I used yesterday in our examples. So a callback function, like as I defined, is basically just a regular function that you pass as an argument to another function. Okay, it's like passing a function as an argument to another function. So, and we would also demonstrate it here. Process data. This is the data to be processed, and this is the callback. After we have processed the data, we want to call this callback function. So in the function body, we have once result equal to data is data times 2 data. Then we now call the callback function with this result. Okay. So let's now define a function called print out log. Um, so this log function will just console.log, understand whatever we pass in. Then we now call process data. So when we call process data, we just pass let's say 5, comma, in the callback function is now going to be this log function as well, defined here. Understand? So if you notice, when we pass this log function, we did not call it this way. We did not pass it this way. Understand? Because when you pass it this way, you're basically just calling this log. And even before this process data executes, this log function will need to be evaluated first. And then whatever it returns now gets passed to process data. You understand? So that is why we are just passing like the function name. So in memory, it's just going to pass something like a reference to the function to this other and process data function. So let's call this now. Let's execute this file. Main dot yeah. Then we have 10. That is 10. 10 is basically 5. We processed and results here. Data times 2. And our data is 5. Understand? So, and also we have asynchronous functions. So I did a very brief introduction to it. Oh, let's skip it first. We'll come back to promises and asynchronous functions later. So I believe you should know this one already now. Templates, literal. Okay. So let's say we have a variable called full name. Full name equals to Okay. First name is equal to John. So this is just a simple way to define a string. Okay. And then last name, the do is a very popular name around among devs. Okay. Then the full name. So to concatenate these two names, right? It's something that I've actually been doing all this while, if you've noticed. So using one string, you can actually concatenate John Doe variables. So we can say, you can either do it this way, first name plus last name. We will need space plus last name. And then when we also that log is going to give us full name, name.js, and do. Or you can decide to do it this way, using this backtick. Then we just write our string the normal way. And then anytime you have a variable that you want to evaluate into the string, you just use this dollar sign, open curly braces, then your variable name will have inside there. Okay. Then you format it, and you also have the freedom to format your string the way you want. You understand? Like say if you want it to be like multiple lines, so you want it to be multiple lines, it can work. Understand? Can test it out. Say John Doe. Anyhow, as long as the content of this string and these variable names are valid, you're going to print out the full name. John Doe. You see, that's the way we arrange the string. Okay, so that's for strings and string concatenation. Then array this structuring and maybe objects the structuring array and objects. Okay. So first of all, what is the structuring? So the structuring is just like a shorthand way um of retrieving the contents of an object or an array. Okay. Let's say we have an array called names. Okay. Array called names, and then in this array we have John, James, and Bond. Okay. And then instead of um accessing the items of this array this way, let's say when you want to access John, which is the first item of the array, instead of doing it this way, okay, instead of doing it this way, you can just straight up the structure the names array this way. You you write your cons or left, okay, that you want to declare new variable names. Oh, we already declared first name. Okay, let me use another variable name. Just as if you want to create a new variable name. So name one, name two, name three. Okay, equal to equal to names. So now this is basically just going to output name one, name two, and name three. Okay, this is just going to output this three variable names. So these names now, these variables are now like new variable names. Understand, that represents each item in this array, just the way we position them. James, John, James, and Bond. So I'll run this now. John, James, and Bond. Okay. And let's say names happen to be person, an object called person. This is like a JSON object. Okay. Person, and the person has a name called which is his age, 31, and the right spot is football. Okay. So we can actually destructure this person object without saying person dot name, person dot age. Yes, and just the normal way we usually access items of the objects now. But let's say we want to assign it to a variable. So you write your const keyword, then the open curly braces, then you will now use the keys of this object. Understand? All of these are called keys, and then the values next to them are called values. Key value. Understand? So to destructure an object, you are going to write out the keys just the way they appear in the object, name, age, or spot. Understand? So you just pick out the ones you want to make use of. I omitted the age key because I don't need it. Understand? Then equal to, just as if you want to assign a variable on object. So now this person, so when you try to assign or when you try to define variables this way, you are telling JavaScript that person is an object. So JavaScript is going to be expecting that this person now must have this name key and support, and then this port key. If it doesn't have any of these, it's going to do an error. Understand? Also dot log name port. Okay. John football. But if we could use a key that doesn't exist, this is like this fault now. This way I spelled it. I omitted the R, so this fault, I removed the R. So I spelled it wrongly. Let me correct this. Spelled it wrongly. Instead of SPORT, I just use SPOT. Running this would give us undefined. And what is this undefined? So undefined is JavaScript tell you that is an absence of value. Is an absence of value, meaning that you try to retrieve a spot key from person, okay, and you just didn't find that spot key. So instead of throwing an error, yeah, instead of throwing an error. So what it does is that it found this name, so it just like assign the value for name. Then when it got to time to assign value to sports, it just assigned undefined to it. Understand? So that is why we are seeing undefined here. Understand? So that is, and you actually make use of this a lot. You make use of this a lot. I mean, I'm talking about the structuring. Okay. Mhm. Then promises. Uh, we all like me. I'm the kind of person that I don't like giving promises. Because when you make a promise, people will expect you to keep them. And you cannot make a promise and fail. So the name in JavaScript, you're just imitating the real life um, characteristics of promises. And my screen has gone off. Mm, yeah, offline. No. Okay, I'm back. Right. You guys can also see my screen, right? Hello, can I be heard? Please give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, okay. All right. Let's proceed. So I was talking about promises before my network went out. And I said that promise is basically when you are telling JavaScript that, okay, um, there is this operation I want to run, okay, but I might not want to wait for it to complete before moving on to the next thing. So I want you to run this operation for me, and then as soon as it resolves, let me know. Or if it fails to resolve, that if it throws an error, you let me know, and I will handle the error accordingly. Understand? So that is just the whole idea behind promises. So You can wrap things like IO operations like database read. Let's say when you want to make a HTTP request to another API from the backend, okay? Or you want to read a file in your file system, or you want to write to a file on your file system. So these are the kind of operations that you're going to um, make use of. I'm going to make you use promises. Okay. And okay. It means um, define a function that returns a promise. In Okay. Okay, so let's just use this example I created. And this was where we stopped yesterday. So, so in this fetch, we defined we had two implementations of fetch user. The first one is um, actually a regular function that's going to call back. And this callback is just going to call this callback after it has resolved. And then the second one is using promises. Okay. So, and this is how to define a promise using the new promise keyword. Okay. So let's say we accept an ID and then it's time out. Set timeout function. It's timeout. Let's set timeout and then just basically resolve as soon as they're done. Okay. Okay. That is one of the things with JavaScript that you would nest. You will nest a lot of things. Okay. And then calling this to define name, it will not allow us to use async to an output user values. So are you guys with me? I'm just trying to I was actually trying to define a very simple promise function, very simple function that returns a promise. A promise is like a contract in terms that you are making with the JavaScript runtime. Okay. And then inside that promise, something is going to happen. And the ones that thing happens, say JavaScript is like, or rather, or Node.js rather is assuring you that as soon as that operation completes, I am going to let you know, you understand, whether it completes successfully or in error, I will let you know. So that is the whole idea behind promises. Now, in this fetch user promise, it's is a function that we are using to mimic a database call. So that is why I actually use this set timeout function here. Okay, and in this set timeout function, you notice that I passed a callback, and this callback is basically just calling resolve function. And where did you get this resolve from? It is the first argument of this. It is the first argument of the promise callback function. This is the callback function. Don't forget. So the promise function on its own is expecting or is accepting a callback function. Okay. And in that callback function, the first argument is the resolve function, and the second one is the reject. So let's say your operation, your promise should resolve successfully, your database score resolve successfully, and then the user was found. So under the hood, so most of these things, this is how they actually resolve promises. So they just call this resolve function, and then they pass the user object here. Okay, I can just maybe write like a JSON here. This is like the user ID one in John. Understand? Resolve, and then it resolves, and then whatever it resolves, whatever you pass to the resolve function is now what gets returned. Is now what gets returned here. You understand? And then that thing you now gets returned. Eventually, you're not able to use it in your main function. So this is now the result. And if you console log this result, it's going to show us results of console result. Okay. Yes. So we have to stringify the result. So you usually see this whenever you try to log an object to the console without telling without stringifying it. So JavaScript like would not really understand, or rather, it consists of log function. Will not really understand that this is supposed to is supposed to log the content of this result. You understand? So what this JSON does stringify does is that it just carries this JSON object and it turns it to a string. You understand? Like string, like literally. You understand? And then everything in that string now gets returned in this stringify function by this stringify function. So calling node.js. Okay, so you can ask that our function resolved successfully. Over here, result is equal to this. Okay, but what happens when our promise rejects? Okay, so let's say something happened and the, the application wasn't able to connect to the database. You understand? So error database connection. Okay, so we couldn't connect to the database and then we just reject. So what now happens? And we are still trying to capture the results. Understand? Let's see whether it's going to return this thing or if our application is going to very ugly messages. Yes, and we can see that we have unhandled promise rejection error. Okay, and then where is the error message? And this is the error message we rejected with. As you can see, error database connection failed. So, but this is actually a very careless way of handling your exceptions because normally you should expect that certain errors would be thrown by your application and you want to catch every single one of them because you don't want your user coming to your website just be seeing ugly messages. You understand? You still need to um, catch whatever error it is and then let the user know that okay, this error is not your fault. We are currently looking into it. You understand? So don't panic. So your user would not be seeing ugly messages and also give them good experience when they use the application. Okay. So how do we handle this error now? We wrap it in a try catch block. Okay. So in this try catch block, this is basically the syntax console dot error or log, anyone you want to use. You understand? But when you use console dot error, depending on how you configured your application, is going to this console dot error is going to be logged to another um, output. You understand? You say if you have a separate log file for your errors, it's going that log file is going to capture anything you put inside this um, console.error. But if you use console.log and you have another log file capturing results for console.log, that particular log file is going to capture for console.log instance. It all depends on how you configure the application. So we say um, uh, let's user is maybe just pass the error. Okay. And then I want to also move this line of code into the try block. I mean, because leaving it here is not going to allow this result function to be accessed outside the scope. If you know what scope is basically just a way of limiting variables to a particular block of code. You understand? And usually identify a block of code by listing this curly braces. Understand? So this is a block of code, and this result cannot be accessed by anything outside the block of code. So I'm going to move this up this point. Okay. So consider log. So you notice that I use log for this place and error. I already explained it earlier. So you usually want to log your errors to the error file, understand, and then your the log is just a regular output, you understand, just monitoring how your or what your application does at each point in time. So please run this again. And see that our application has gracefully handled the error. Okay. But I don't like this error message. Let's reject, let's give it like an error code. Understand? The error code is probably something like the variable connection, the database. Mhm. So let's run it again. So this is how it's going to appear in our log file. You can see it. Fetch user request field. And this is now the code you can now use to know what particular error occurred. Okay. So that is it for promises and async operations. Okay. So that brings us to the final lap of tonight's class, creating servers using the HTTP module. Okay, creating HTTP server. So this is so as a Node.js dev, most of the time you actually be making use of frameworks. Okay, like I myself, I make use of Express and Nest.js. Okay, so these are frameworks that are already implemented most of these libraries under the hood. So you don't have to configure all of these things yourself. All you have to do is just one or two lines of code. You started up an Express server, understand? But just to understand what exactly is going on, please create one for ourselves. Okay. So what is HTTP or HTTPS? I mean, I'm not going to take HTTPS because I'm not making an essence for you. So, but HTTP means hypertext transfer protocol. Okay, so it's just a way we used to be like a protocol we used to communicate over the web. Okay, and with HTTP, your connections are not secure in the sense that there is no encryption between your web browser, that is the client, and the backend server your web browser is communicating with. Okay, so which was why they introduced HTTPS. HTTPS. So HTTPS actually comes with something like a certificate. Okay, a certificate that is exchanged. So whenever you visit the website, let's say HTTPS google.com. So something is going to happen between your browser and that and the web server, which is called a TCP handshake. So this basically does exchanges certain um, what's it called? So basically something like it just verifies that your communication with that server, your browser communication with that server is encrypted and no middleman. You say you're making of a public Wi-Fi and maybe the kind of is kind of you're kind of intercepting your request. You understand? So anybody that is between your the connection between your laptop and the web server in the cloud will not be able to see exactly what you are doing as plain text. You understand? So with HTTPS, they know that you are browsing, but they are not able to decrypt the content. You understand? They are not seeing lots of gibberish. You understand? So so let us import the HTTP library in this syntax. Okay, then to create a simple server instance, we call the create server method. The create server method in the HTTP module. Okay, and this create server method, we call it. And this create server method actually accepts a callback function as the first argument. And this callback function accepts two arguments. It's a JavaScript something. You understand? So you just need to break it down one after the other. So a lot of parameters here. Okay. So that callback function accepts two parameters, two arguments, request and response. Then in the body of this callback function is the operation you want it to run. Whenever someone visits your makes a request to your server, you understand. So are you with me? I thought someone unmuted a mic. Or do you have any question? No, I guess. Requests received successfully. Okay. So that's considered log. So whenever someone visits makes a request to the server, he does he does consoles he does logs to our console. Okay. Then we'll show them a response dot write. Right here. Okay, so this is the header. 200. I'll explain all of this. Content, type, and then this is the text slash plain response dot hello from my web server. Okay. Then we will now start the server here. Server.listen and port 3000. Then run this as soon as you start. Also.log server is running on HTTP, not HTTPS, that is localhost. And our localhost is now exposed to the internet over the internet. Okay. So, are you guys with me? I think some people have left. We've not taken attendance.
So I have a question.
All right, please go ahead.
Yeah, but your screen is not visible again.
Just send to us.
Okay.
I'm
So I have
fixing
a
it now.
question concerning the create server. That is the response and the request and response. So
Yes, I'm about to explain that actually.
okay,
You can
let's
still ask a
explain it.
question.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to just ask, how does the server differentiate the request from the response? Like, how does it know that this thing that you're sending in now is a request, and then this is what I'm supposed to give up as the response?
Okay. Just a minute. So, as a backend developer, one of the very first things you need to understand is the request and response cycle. Understand? So, understanding this, what is request? Request is basically whatever the user is sending from their web browser. Understand? Okay. Yeah, I think my screen is black up now. So you can see my screen now, right?
Yes, I visible.
All right. So the request object, the request is basically whatever the user is sending from the client side to your server. So everything from the name of your website, the endpoints they want to visit, let's say they want to register, maybe slash login, understand? Then if they've actually sent their login credentials, username and password, it's going to be in the request body. And then some other things in the header too. A header is basically I need something like a diagram to illustrate this thing that's sounding like rubbish. Okay, request head request body. And then all of this, you now have the response. And then response body. So even your web server knows that it is supposed to have something like an object that stores information about the request that is coming in. Okay? Your web server knows, or whoever that programmed and built this create server now, they know that you are expecting a request object that has information about the header, okay, and then the request body. The request body is basically all those um, information like your username and password you send when filling a form, you understand? And then after processing the request, it also knows that it is supposed to send a response, you understand? But before sending this response, it needs to um, put them together. Okay, it needs to put them together. It needs to tell the web browser if it is receiving, if it's sending a cookie. If you know what a cookie is, you just um, the cookie is just just like a snacks for web browser. You know, whenever you see the website, you say, "Do you want to accept cookies?" Once you accept, they will just your web browser will just collect those cookies. They're like tokens, you understand? It's not three cookies, and not real cookies. They're just like tokens, you understand, that it will store in your in it will store in your browser. So whenever you visit that website, it's going to send these cookies, you understand, in the request header. Understand? If you send those cookies in the request header, and then whenever the server wants to update those cookies, maybe send more cookies to the client, the browser, we can actually send a cookie and that cookie again in this response header. Okay, I'm saying too much. What I'm just trying to explain is that in this code now, we have two different objects to track the request and response, um, to track request and response. You understand? So yeah, we imported the HTTP module, and we now like created a server instance. And in this server instance, we pass something like a function. You understand? A callback function that will run every single time someone visits this our local host, this endpoint. You understand? When someone visits it, this runs, this runs. You understand? So now it's not late for you to do whatever you want with the request body and then now send them a response. You understand? So this HTTP library is not so doesn't have a lot of features compared to an Express application. So with Express, it helps you to handle things like they help you to handle things like paths. You say whenever someone visits slash login, it allows configure to easily, and then it has middlewares too, where you can use to capture those cookies, like authentication cookies. You understand? Those cookies are what identifies the user after they logged in your application. So you send back cookies that okay, this person has logged in. Save these cookies, and whenever the person wants to visit our website, send this cookie so that we know that this person has logged in before. Yes, and so that is like the use case of cookies. So back to this our code. We now have the response that's right here. So okay, I first of all console.log to the out to our console. I first of all mount our console that the request has been received successfully. Then I did whatever I wanted to do with the request object. And after I was done, and I'm not trying to process a response to the user. Understand? So this 200 here is something that is called a status code. Okay, so this status code um, is basically just a code, a number that you send back to the browser or the user that will let them know if the operation or whatever the intended to do in your website or when they send that request was successful. Understand? And they have different status codes ranging from my screen has gone off again. Yes. It's fixing now. Okay, back. So, and there are different status codes ranging from 100 to 100, 200. That is from like 200 to like 299. So this is like whenever you receive a status code within this range, it means that the operation was successful, no error. Understand? So, okay, then we have 300 to 399 is a redirect. Okay, like sometimes when you visit an endpoint, or let's say you use HTTP google.com, Google will usually like redirect you to their encrypted version. That is the HTTPS google.com. So they don't want you using HTTP google.com because it's not secure. They know that somebody can be affecting your request and be sniffing whatever you're doing. Understand? Over the network. So that is what redirect does. Then we have the 400 to 499, which is bad request. So this bad request is telling the user that the error is their fault. You understand? Let's say when they send incorrect login credentials, they want to log in to their account and then they send in incorrect username or password. You send them a code within this range, informing them that it is their fault. You understand? And then we now have the 500 internal server error. So these past few days, a lot of cloud platforms have been crashing. Understand? A lot of cloud services infrastructure have been crashing. The most recent one I think happened yesterday with Cloudflare, and a lot of websites were not loading like Twitter or known as X. So I mean that is not the user's fault. So whenever you visit that website, whenever you visit the website that is behind Cloudflare, you will just see a 500 error or an error code within the range, telling you that it is the developer's fault and the broken something which they are supposed to fix. So just come back later. Mhm. That is what some of these status code means. Um, so I was explaining status code, and then we now have the second argument to this write head function. So basically, we are just writing the header. Okay. So I explained the request header and then the response header. So this header contains information. Okay. Contains certain information like the content type that you are sending back to the user. Here it is the plain text they are sending back to the user. You understand? So when you pass this header, content type, plain text, your web browser is basically going to know that is knowing the kind of listen that it is expecting. You understand? The kind of file format it is expecting. So if you send something like application/JSON, your web browser knows that, okay, the response is a JSON object, and I'm going to treat it as a JSON object. But, and then if it is an image, your web browser, I say your web browser, if your web server is sending back an image to the user, you're also supposed to indicate it here so that your browser, so the user's browser will know that an image is coming in. Let me treat it as such and then and display it to the user. You understand? So that is why you need to pass this content type. But the good thing is that when you use frameworks like Express, these things are handled um, automatically for you. Understand? Then here we now have the text. Hello from my web server. And then if we should run this script, I'm expecting to see this text on my screen whenever I visit this endpoint. Node.js. So our server is now running. We need visit localhost. What's 3,000. Why is it slow now? We just here. So this is the response. Hello from my web server. So, and okay, request received, request received. Cancel it. And to stop the server, you just do Control C. Control C. Just to send a signal. You need to stop the server. Okay. This is a very simple web server. And is that well understood? Before I move
Yes,
to
sir.
the next. All right.
Yes, sir. In this create server method, just like how we return functions, can we also return the response here? Like instead of
From where?
console lines, can we return the response?
You don't actually. Yeah, is the way they designed the way they designed it. You understand? You cannot just say return the string hello from. Is this not what you mean?
No, like return the method, like return the create server, something like that.
I don't. Sorry, I'm not. Your question is not really clear. You understand? You know that this create server, first of all, is returning something. You're aware, right?
Yes, the request and the response.
Yeah, it is returning an instance actually. Understand? An instance of the server, which is now what we now have here, and then we can now use it and then start up the server using this listing method, right? So you cannot actually like return or return request or return response. You only have access to those objects and their methods. Understand? Like this, they give you methods like manipulate the response objects. Understand? Like this with this right here, they're able to pass the status code or the response header. Okay, and you can also write the body, the content of this. This thing can also be a HTML. Um, it can also be a HTML code. Let me highlight this. So it could be like, see, hello world, and then close this, expand. Okay, so let me run this again. Server is running, and then by refresh, let's see that. Oh, it didn't translate this as a HTML code. I didn't change the header. You see? So you see what happened here now? Because I didn't change this content type from text/plain to the correct content type. So the browser thought that this thing is just a plain text. So it doesn't try to interpret this as a HTML code, even though this is the HTML code. You understand? So you need to tell the web browser how it's going to interpret whatever response you are giving to it. You understand? So now we start it again. On refreshing this, you see that the web browser will now interpret this as a p tag, and you can now see that this is now a proper HTML page. Okay. You inspect this. You should see that there should be only one p tag on this page. Yeah. So now you can see. I see it here. Okay. So that's that for creating web servers. So we've come to the end of today's class. In today's class, we actually went through a lot of basic concepts when it comes to writing JavaScript for the backend. You understand? So which I introduced you to things like promises, asynchronous, defining asynchronous functions, okay, destructuring an object and arrays, and then also how to import and export modules. All of these things were the things that we discussed. And then rounding up, we also created a very simple Node.js server, you understand, using the HTTP library. But in real world, as a backend dev, you will probably never be doing something like this, like using the HTTP library. You understand? You will probably be using the ones that were created by frameworks, Liquid Arts created Express. Under the hood, they are making use of HTTP, you understand? So you don't have to worry about all these things. So we've come to the end of today's class, and thank you for sticking to the end. See you on Friday. God's willing. Do you have any questions?
So please, on Friday, can you just go over the asynchronous and functions, like that read file sync? Like I'm a little bit confused. They just
All right, definitely. We'll go through it. We'll go right on Friday. Is that one?
Yeah, thank you, sir.
All right.